The autumn rain pattered steadily against James Wilson's windshield as he drove down the winding road toward home. The clock on his dashboard showed 9:45 p.m., and his eyes felt heavy after a long day at his auto repair shop. The dark clouds had rolled in unexpectedly, making the usually peaceful drive a bit more challenging. The rhythmic swish of his wipers had almost lulled him into a trance when a flash of hazard lights caught his attention. Through the rain-streaked window, he could make out the shape of a luxury car, a black Mercedes, pulled over on the shoulder. The car's hazard lights blinked desperately in the growing darkness, like a silent cry for help. James slowed down, his headlights illuminating the scene before him. A woman stood beside the car, holding her phone up to the sky, clearly searching for a signal. Her expensive-looking cream-colored business suit was getting soaked in the steady drizzle. James felt the familiar pull of responsibility that came with being a mechanic. He'd lost count of how many times he'd stopped to help stranded motorists over the years. His mom had always taught him that kindness was free, and somehow her voice echoed in his mind, even now, 20 years later. With a soft sigh and a gentle smile, he pulled his trusted blue pickup truck onto the shoulder, leaving enough space between vehicles for safety. Grabbing his worn red toolbox from behind his seat and shrugging on his rain jacket, James stepped out into the cool evening air. The sound of rain hitting leaves filled the silence, creating a gentle backdrop to the scene. His boots crunched on the loose gravel as he approached, and he made sure to call out a friendly greeting to avoid startling the woman. "Car trouble?" he asked, keeping his voice warm and professional. The woman turned, and James noticed immediately how her designer clothes couldn't hide her obvious distress. She was elegant, probably in her mid-40s, with carefully styled dark hair that was now starting to fall flat in the rain. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, held a mix of relief and something else. Was it fear? "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor that seemed out of place for someone so put together. "I have a flat tire, and my phone isn't getting any signal out here." She gestured to the rear driver's side tire, which was indeed completely flat. James approached the tire, clicking on his flashlight to get a better look. The rubber was shredded on one side, not a simple puncture, but the kind of damage that comes from hitting something sharp at speed. As he knelt to examine it more closely, he noticed the woman's expensive heels pacing back and forth behind him, her movements jittery and uncertain. "I'm James Wilson," he offered, hoping to ease her obvious nervousness. "I own Wilson's Auto Repair just about 10 miles back. This looks like a nasty flat, but nothing we can't fix. Let me get your spare on, and you'll be back on your way in no time." The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly at his words, but her eyes kept darting to the road, checking every passing car. "Diana," she replied simply, offering no last name. "I can't tell you how grateful I am. I was starting to worry I'd be stuck out here all night." James set to work, his experienced hands moving efficiently despite the rain. He'd changed thousands of tires over the years, and his movements were almost automatic. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice Diana's designer luggage in the back seat, packed as if for a long trip. Her phone kept lighting up with incoming calls, each one making her jump slightly, but she declined them all with trembling fingers. What should have been a simple tire change felt different somehow. The air was charged with intention that James couldn't quite explain. Still, he focused on the task at hand, determined to help this mysterious woman get back on her way, unaware that this simple act of kindness was about to change his life forever. The rain had begun to ease as James worked on changing the tire, but the night air grew colder. His experienced hands moved swiftly, loosening the lug nuts with practiced efficiency. Diana stood nearby, holding his flashlight at his request, though her hand trembled enough to make the beam of light dance across the wet pavement. "You've done this before," Diana commented, watching his methodical movements. Her voice carried a hint of refinement that matched her expensive attire, but there was an edge to it, something that spoke of sleepless nights and worry. A car passed by, its headlights sweeping across them, and Diana instinctively stepped back into the shadows. James nodded, focusing on positioning the jack properly under the car. About 3 times a day at the shop, plus Good Samaritan stops like this. He glanced up at her with a friendly smile, trying to put her at ease, though usually people aren't quite so well dressed for a flat tire. Diana's hand moved self-consciously to smooth her silk blouse, now spotted with rain. "I wasn't exactly planning on this detour," she said, attempting a light laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her phone buzzed again, the 5th time in the past 15 minutes, and she quickly silenced it without looking at the screen. As James worked, he couldn't help but notice more details that seemed out of place. The Mercedes was new and pristine, except for a small scratch near the trunk that looked fresh, as if it had recently scraped against something. The back seat held not just luggage, but also a laptop bag and what appeared to be files, hastily stuffed into a leather briefcase. The spare tire was being stubborn, and as James gave it an extra tug, Diana's phone lit up again. This time, the name Thompson flashed across the screen before she could decline the call. James noticed her hands were shaking more violently now, and she quickly stuffed the phone into her pocket. "Your friend seems pretty worried about you," James ventured carefully, keeping his tone casual as he finally freed the spare tire. Diana's green eyes met his for a moment, and he saw something in them that made his heart skip a beat, raw fear. "Not a friend," she said quietly, then quickly added, "just work. You know how it is with some colleagues. They don't understand the concept of personal time." She attempted to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. As James fitted the spare tire onto the car, a distant pair of headlights appeared around the bend. Diana's entire body tensed, and she moved to stand behind James's truck until the vehicle passed. It was just a family minivan, but James noticed how Diana only relaxed slightly after its taillights disappeared into the darkness. "Almost finished," James announced, tightening the last lug nut. "This spare will get you where you need to go, but you'll want to get a proper tire soon. I can fix the flat at my shop if you'd like." He stood up, wiping his hands on his work pants. Diana was already reaching for her purse, pulling out a thick envelope. "You're very kind, but I need to keep moving." She thrust the envelope toward him. "Please, take this. It's the least I can do." James held up his hands, shaking his head. "No need for that. Just glad I could help." A flash of surprise crossed Diana's face, followed by something that looked almost like guilt. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "People like you are rare, Mr. Wilson. Good people who help strangers without asking questions." She glanced nervously over her shoulder before continuing. "I need you to remember something. If anyone asks, you never saw me, never changed my tire, never had this conversation. Can you do that?" Before James could respond, another car appeared in the distance. Diana quickly pressed a business card into his hand, then hurried to her car door. The card was blank except for a single number written in elegant script. As she started her engine, James caught a glimpse of her face in the glow of the dashboard lights. The fear was still there, but now mixed with determination. Within moments, she was gone, leaving James standing in the drizzle, holding a blank card, and feeling like he'd just stepped into something much bigger than a simple flat tire. The drive home felt different to James after his encounter with Diana. Every shadow on the road seemed deeper, every passing car more significant. The blank business card sat on his passenger seat, its single printed number catching the occasional flash of streetlight as he drove. Her final warning echoed in his mind. "If anyone asks, you never saw me." James pulled into his driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel doing little to settle his unsettled thoughts. His small craftsman house, usually a welcome sight after a long day, looked somehow different in the rain-washed darkness. The porch light he'd left on that morning cast a warm glow across his wet front steps, but even this familiar scene felt change, as if Diana's mystery had followed him home. Inside, James went through his usual evening routine, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over him. He hung his damp work jacket by the door, kicked off his muddy boots, and headed to the kitchen. The microwave clock showed 10:30 p.m. as he warmed up leftover lasagna from Sunday's dinner with his sister. Sitting at his small kitchen table, James pulled out the business card again. The number was written in elegant handwriting, each digit precise and deliberate. He found himself memorizing it without really meaning to, the way you sometimes remember things that feel important, even if you don't know why. The local news played quietly on his small kitchen TV, providing background noise as he ate. He nearly choked on his lasagna when the news anchor mentioned a developing story about corporate fraud at Edison Technologies, one of the biggest companies in the state. The camera showed the gleaming office building downtown, its windows reflecting the evening sky. James reached for his phone, then stopped. Diana's warning rang in his ears again. Whatever she was involved in, she clearly wanted to stay hidden. But from what? Or whom? The lasagna suddenly tasted like cardboard in his mouth as his mind replayed every detail of their encounter. The scratch on her car, had it come from a hurried escape? The files in her backseat, the constant phone calls she kept declining, her expensive clothes that looked like they'd been worn for too long. Each detail now seemed to tell part of a story he wasn't sure he wanted to understand. Sleep proved elusive that night. James lay in bed, listening to the rain that had picked up again, tapping against his bedroom window. Every passing car made him tense, wondering if it would slow down, stop, bring more mystery to his doorstep. His phone sat on his nightstand, the blank business card propped against it, both items seeming to watch him in the dark. Around midnight, a car did slow down outside. James got up and peered through his bedroom curtains, his heart pounding. It was just Mrs. Henderson from next door, returning from her late shift at the hospital. He watched her hurry through the rain to her front door, her scrubs visible under her rain jacket. Everything perfectly normal, and yet somehow not. As he finally drifted off to sleep, James couldn't shake the feeling that he'd become part of something bigger than himself. His simple act of kindness, stopping to help a stranded motorist, something he'd done countless times before, felt different this time. It felt like the first chapter in a story he hadn't meant to start reading. His last conscious thought was of Diana's eyes, the way fear and determination had mixed in them, like someone who knew they were in danger but had decided to face it anyway. Tomorrow was going to be another busy day of the shop, and he told himself that's all he needed to focus on. But deep down, he knew something had changed. The blank business card on his nightstand was proof of that, a small piece of paper that somehow felt as heavy as the secrets it might be hiding. Morning arrived with gentle rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds, a stark contrast to last night's rain. James stood in his kitchen, inhaling the comforting aroma of fresh coffee, trying to convince himself that yesterday's strange encounter was nothing more than an interesting story to tell at family dinners. The morning paper lay unopened on his counter, his usual routine momentarily forgotten as he stirred sugar into his coffee. The sound caught his attention first, the low, distinctive rumble of a powerful engine idling outside his house. Different from the usual morning traffic, this sound held purpose. James walked to his kitchen window, coffee mug warm in his hands, and felt his heart skip a beat. A black SUV, sleek and official-looking, had pulled up in front of his house. The windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see inside. James watched as two men stepped out of the vehicle. They moved with the precise, practiced motions of people used to making their presence known. Both wore crisp dark suits that seemed out of place in his quiet neighborhood of mechanics and schoolteachers. The taller one adjusted his tie as he surveyed the house, while his partner held what looked like a leather portfolio. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime feeling oddly inappropriate. James set down his coffee mug, noticing how his hand trembled slightly. Diana's warning from last night echoed in his mind. "If anyone asks, you never saw me." He took a deep breath, straightened his shirt, and walked to the door. Opening it revealed the two men standing on his porch, their badges already held up for inspection. The morning sun glinted off the metal, making the FBI insignias unmistakable. "Mr. James Wilson?" the taller agent asked, his tone professional but not unkind. "I'm Agent Thomas Roberts, and this is Agent Michael Chen. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your activities last evening." James felt his mouth go dry but managed to keep his voice steady. "Of course. Would you like to come in?" The words came automatically, his mother's lessons in politeness taking over even as his mind raced. The agents accepted with professional nods, their shoes clicking softly on his hardwood floor as they entered. His living room, with its comfortable but worn furniture and family photos on the walls, seemed to shrink in the presence of the two agents. They remained standing, politely declining his offer to sit. Agent Chen opened his portfolio, removing a photograph that he held up for James to see. "Mr. Wilson, do you recognize this woman?" The photo showed Diana, but not as he'd seen her last night. This was a professional headshot, her hair perfectly styled, wearing a business suit and pearl necklace. She looked confident, successful, and much less afraid than the woman he'd met in the rain. James felt time slow down as he looked at the photo. His coffee mug sat cooling on the kitchen counter, forgotten. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, and a school bus drove past, normal morning sounds that felt surreal in the moment. He thought about Diana's frightened eyes, the way she kept checking over her shoulder, the mysterious phone calls she'd refused to answer. Agent Roberts watched him carefully, his trained eyes no doubt catching every micro-expression that crossed James's face. "Mr. Wilson, we want to be clear. You're not in any trouble. But what you tell us in the next few minutes could be very important for national security." The morning sun continued to stream through his windows, casting long shadows across the room. James stood there, feeling the weight of Diana's warning on one shoulder and his own moral compass on the other. Whatever he decided to say next would set things in motion that he couldn't undo. The blank business card still sat on his nightstand upstairs, its single number now feeling less like a mystery and more like a key to something much bigger than a simple flat tire. James sat on his living room couch, the FBI agents now seated across from him. His coffee sat untouched on the side table, gone cold. Agent Roberts opened a sleek laptop, while Agent Chen spread several documents on the coffee table between them. The morning light streaming through the windows made the scene feel surreal, like a movie playing out in his own living room. "Diana Blackwood," Agent Roberts began, turning the laptop to show James a news article. "Chief Financial Officer at Edison Technologies for the past 8 years. Or at least she was, until 3 days ago when she discovered something that changed everything." The article showed Diana at a company event, smiling confidently beside other executives in expensive suits. James leaned forward, his eyes scanning the article. The woman in the photo was unmistakably the same person he'd helped last night, but she looked different, polished, confident, untouched by the fear he'd seen in her eyes on that rainy road. "Ms. Blackwood," Agent Chen continued, his voice steady and professional, "uncovered evidence of a massive corporate fraud scheme. We're talking billions of dollars, Mr. Wilson. Money laundering, fake accounts, everything hidden behind perfectly crafted spreadsheets and false reports. But she found the patterns, traced the money, and gathered proof." Agent Roberts pulled out another photo, this one showing a group of serious-looking men in business suits leaving a courthouse. "These are the people she exposed. Top executives who've been running this scheme for years. People with connections, resources, and a lot to lose if Ms. Blackwood testifies." The pieces started falling into place in James's mind. Diana's nervous behavior, the constant phone calls she'd been avoiding, her desperation to keep moving. "She was running from them," he said quietly, more to himself than the agents. "Not exactly running," Agent Chen corrected. "We had her in protective custody, moving her to a safe house. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. She noticed her police escort taking an unusual route. Her instincts told her something wasn't right, and she managed to slip away during a fuel stop. That's when her tire got damaged," Agent Roberts added. She believes it was sabotage before she escaped, meant to strand her on a lonely road where he left the sentence unfinished, but James could fill in the blank. His hands felt cold as he remembered the dark, rainy night. "Your auto shop has an excellent reputation, Mr. Wilson," Agent Chen said, changing direction. "Been in business for what, 8 years now? Former military mechanic, perfect record, active in community service. When Ms. Blackwood contacted us this morning, she specifically mentioned you." James's eyebrows rose in surprise. "She contacted you, but she said not to tell anyone about helping her." Agent Roberts nodded approvingly. "She needed to make sure you were trustworthy before involving you further. Your background check came back clean, and more importantly, you proved your character last night. You helped her without asking questions, refused payment, and kept her secret until we approached you." The morning had grown brighter outside, but James felt like he was seeing everything in a new light. The simple act of changing a tire had connected him to something much larger than himself. He thought about Diana, Ms. Blackwood, and the courage it must have taken to stand up against powerful people doing wrong. "Last night," James said slowly, remembering something, "she slipped me a business card with a number on it, just before she drove away." Both agents sat up straighter, exchanging quick glances. "Mr. Wilson," Agent Roberts leaned forward, his voice intense but controlled. "That number might be the key to everything. It could be account details, access codes, or coordinates to where she's hidden the evidence. Ms. Blackwood is brilliant with numbers. She would have given you something crucial without making it obvious." James walked to his bedroom and retrieved the blank business card from his nightstand, turning it over in his hands as he returned to the agents. The simple number written in elegant handwriting suddenly felt like it carried the weight of the world. He passed it to Agent Roberts, who studied it carefully before showing it to his partner. 7 digits, Agent Chen mused, photographing the card with a specialized phone. Could be coordinates, could be a bank account, could be an encryption key. "We'll need our analysts to look at this." He sealed the card in an evidence bag while continuing to speak. "Mr. Wilson, this is where things get complicated. Your involvement so far has been accidental, but what happens next must be your choice." Agent Roberts cleared his throat. "Those men after Ms. Blackwood, they know someone helped her last night. Traffic cameras would have caught your truck on that road. It's only a matter of time before they trace it back to you." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "We can protect you, but it means you'll need to work with us." James walked to his window, looking out at his quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson was watering her roses next door, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in his living room. His eyes drifted to his beloved truck in the driveway, the one he'd saved up for years to buy, the one that had led him to this moment. "What exactly would working with you mean?" James asked, turning back to face the agents. His voice was steady, though his heart raced with a mix of fear and, surprisingly, excitement. Agent Chen opened his portfolio again. "Your auto shop is perfect. Legitimate business, regular customers, nothing to raise suspicion. We could set up surveillance there, monitor for anyone connected to Edison Technologies. More importantly, if Ms. Blackwood needs to make contact again, she knows she can trust you." But Agent Roberts added, his tone serious, "This isn't a movie, Mr. Wilson. This is real, with real dangers. These people have billions of dollars at stake. They won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to protect themselves." James sat down heavily in his armchair, his mind racing. He thought about Diana, Ms. Blackwood, and the fear in her eyes last night. He thought about the fraud she'd uncovered, the courage it took to stand up against it. He remembered his father's words from years ago. "Son, doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right." "If I say no," James asked slowly, "what happens then?" "We'll arrange protection for you," Agent Roberts replied. "Move you temporarily, set you up somewhere safe until the case is resolved. Your life would be disrupted, but you'd be secure." James looked around his living room at the photos on the walls, family, friends, memories of a simple life well lived. His eyes settled on a picture of his father in his old mechanic's uniform, standing proudly in front of their first family car. The old man had taught him more than just how to fix engines. He taught him about integrity, about standing up for what's right. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across his floor. In the distance, he could hear the familiar sounds of his neighborhood waking up. Cars starting, dogs barking, children laughing as they walked to school. His normal life seemed to be balanced on the edge of a knife, waiting for his decision. James took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he faced the agents. The fear was still there, but something stronger was growing alongside it. Determination. "I want to help," he said firmly. "Not just because I'm already involved, but because it's the right thing to do." What's our next step? 3 days after James's decision to help, Wilson's auto repair looked exactly the same from the outside. The familiar sign still hung above the garage doors, tools still clanked against metal, and the smell of motor oil still filled the air. But beneath this ordinary surface, everything had changed. Agent Chen, now dressed in mechanic's overalls with Mike stitched on the pocket, worked on a sit-in while carefully watching the street. 2 other agents posed as customers in the waiting room, pretending to read old magazines while monitoring security feeds hidden in their phones. The FBI had transformed James's simple shop into a high-tech surveillance hub without anyone noticing. James wiped his hands on a shop rag, trying to act normal as he finished changing the oil in Mrs. Peterson's minivan. His regular customers still came and went, completely unaware that their trusted mechanic was now part of an FBI operation. The security cameras looked like ordinary surveillance equipment, but they were actually advanced systems capable of facial recognition and license plate tracking. "Oil change for the blue minivan is done," James called out, maintaining his usual routine. This phrase was now a code, telling the agents that he'd spotted another black SUV driving past the shop for the 3rd time that morning. His years of attention to detail as a mechanic made him an unexpectedly good observer. The number from Diana's business card had led the FBI to a breakthrough. It was a reference to a secure server containing financial records, evidence that could bring down the entire fraud operation. But they needed Diana to access it safely, and first, they had to protect her from the people trying to silence her. As James worked on his next car, he thought about how his knowledge of engines had become surprisingly useful to the operation. Yesterday, he'd noticed that one of the suspicious vehicles following Diana's trail had a distinctive engine sound, a modified exhaust system he'd worked on before. This detail helped the FBI identify one of the men involved in the pursuit. The bell above the shop door chimed as a new customer walked in. James's heart skipped a beat. It was one of the executives from the photo Agent Roberts had shown him, the one of people leaving the courthouse. The man looked around the shop with poorly concealed interest, asking about a simple tire rotation. "Happy to help," James said cheerfully, maintaining his cover while pressing the hidden alert button under his workbench. Agent Chen moved closer, pretending to check inventory while actually photographing the man with a hidden camera. The executive's expensive watch and designer shoes seemed out of place in the modest shop. As James worked on the executive's car, he noticed a hidden compartment that had been recently installed, something only a trained mechanic would spot. He marked the car with a special UV pen while pretending to check the tire pressure, giving the FBI a way to track it later. The afternoon sun streamed through the garage doors as James finished up the tire rotation. The executive paid in cash and left, trying to appear casual but clearly suspicious of the shop. As soon as he drove away, the waiting room customers rushed to their surveillance van parked around the corner. Later that evening, as James closed up the shop, Agent Roberts arrived with news. The tracking data from the executive's car had led them to a private airfield. More importantly, the number Diana had given James had helped them access crucial evidence. They were getting closer. James looked around his shop as he prepared to leave for the day. Tools hung in their familiar places, Oil stains marked the concrete floor, and the evening sun cast long shadows through the windows. His simple auto repair shop had become the center of something extraordinary, and somehow he knew they were moving toward something big. Diana was still out there, waiting for the right moment to come forward, and James was ready to help her finish what she'd started. 6 months had passed since that rainy night when James helped change a tire for a mysterious woman. The morning newspaper sat on his desk at the auto shop, its headline bold and clear: Edison Technologies executives found guilty in billion-dollar fraud case. James smiled as he sipped his morning coffee, remembering how it all unfolded. The evidence Diana had gathered, combined with the tracking work done from James's shop, had created an unbreakable case. The private airfield they'd discovered had been the executive's escape route, complete with a plane fueled and ready for a quick departure to a country without extradition. But they never got the chance to use it. The bell above the shop door chimed, and James looked up from the newspaper. His heart warmed at the sight of the familiar face. Diana Blackwood, looking completely different from the frightened woman he'd met that rainy night. She wore a confident smile now, her business suit crisp and perfect, no fear in her eyes. "I thought I'd find you reading about it," she said, walking over to his desk. The waiting room was empty except for them, though Agent Chen, now officially back with the FBI, had insisted on keeping some of the security cameras active, just in case. "The best part," James said, turning the paper to show her, "is that all the stolen money is being returned to the people they cheated. Your evidence didn't just put them in jail. It's helping thousands of people get their savings back." Diana nodded, her expression serious but satisfied. "And it all started because you stopped to help a stranger with a flat tire." She paused, looking around the shop. "Though I have to admit, I really do have a flat tire this time. No mystery, no hidden messages. Just ran over a nail on the way here." James laughed, the sound echoing off the garage walls. "Finally, something simple. Let me take a look at it." As they walked to her car, a different one from that fateful night, he noticed how relaxed she seemed, how the weight of secrets had lifted from her shoulders. The trial had been big news for weeks. Diana's testimony, backed by the mountain of evidence she'd gathered, had been unshakable. The FBI's surveillance operation from James's shop had caught the executives planning to silence her, adding witness intimidation to their long list of charges. Not a single one had escaped justice. As James worked on her tire, Diana leaned against the workbench, watching. "You know, the FBI was impressed with how you handled everything. Agent Roberts mentioned they might want to consult with you on other cases. Apparently, a mechanic's eye for detail can be pretty valuable in investigations." James tightened the last lug nut and stood up, wiping his hands on his shop rag. "I think I'll stick to fixing cars," he said with a smile. "Though I have to admit, helping bring down a billion-dollar fraud scheme was pretty exciting." The morning sun streamed through the garage doors, making the fresh coat of paint on the walls gleam. After everything had settled, James had decided to renovate the shop a bit. A framed newspaper article hung near his office, a small story about local business owners who make a difference in their community. The article didn't mention his role in the Edison Technologies case, but that was fine with him. "You know what I learned from all this?" Diana said, reaching for her purse to pay for the tire repair. James waved away her money, just like he had that first night. She smiled, understanding. "I learned that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness." As Diana drove away, James watched her car disappear down the street. His shop was already filling up with the day's regular customers, oil changes, brake repairs, the usual stuff. But now, every time he heard tires on wet pavement or saw headlights in the rain, he smiled, knowing that doing the right thing, no matter how small it seems, can change the world in ways you never expect.